Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in really to navigate a bit of a minefield. We're talking cultural jargon, commercial history, maybe even some outright snobbery. Our sources gave us this massive stack of conflicting opinions, all about two simple-looking terms. Terms that have, well, divided dance floors and internet forums for well over a decade now.
It really is. It's like a profound cultural conflict hiding inside a debate about acronyms.
Right.
So our mission today really is to get total clarity for you, the listener. What is the real distinction between EDM, that's electronic dance music, and the broader term electronic music?
Yeah, because if you just want to be well informed, these terms seem, well, confusingly overlapping, but also really contentious. Understanding the difference feels kind of crucial.
It is. And you need to know why they're contentious, because it's not just technical, it's cultural. It's worlds apart sometimes.
Okay, let's start unpacking this then. Our sources are pretty clear on one thing. There's absolutely zero consensus on how these terms get used.
Not at all.
And it's not just like disagreeing over audio file types or something technical. This is, it feels like a pitched battle. Generational identity, geography, the whole discomfort around commercialization in a scene that, let's face it, often prides itself on being anti-corporate.
That's exactly the crux of it. And to understand where we are now, we kind of need to look back a bit. The source material brings up a really useful historical parallel, actually.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Think about the early days of electronic music, especially when it first started hitting the mainstream. People just called everything electronic dance music. Well, they called it techno.
Right, I remember that. It didn't matter if it was acid house or garage or breakbeat. If it was new, rhythmic, and electronic, someone would just call it techno.
Exactly. It was, kind of a lazy shorthand. But it was sort of accepted because the whole thing was so new to the general public.
Okay, so the argument is that EDM has basically stepped into that same vague catch-all role now.
Pretty much. The big difference, though, is that today the scene is way more mature. And that new shorthand, EDM, it carries immense baggage. Especially with, the longtime fans, the critics, the purists, who really understand all the subgenre nuances.
Okay, so our deep dive today really has two main parts then. First, we need to define the literal technical boundaries. Where does electronic music stop and electronic dance music begin? And second, we have to get into that emotional, that cultural baggage. Why is the term EDM specifically provoke such a, well, negative or dismissive reaction from the veterans?
Let's start with the hard definitions first. Put on our scientist hats, maybe. Establish the literal territory.
Okay, ready. Lay it on us.
Right. So when we talk about electronic music, EM, we're talking about the absolute broadest possible umbrella. Literally, it just means any music created using electronic instruments, production software, your DAWs, digital audio workstations, or synthesis.
Synths, drum machines, software sequencers, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's purely about the tools used in production.
Okay, but here's where it immediately gets fuzzy, doesn't it? Because if you take that purely technical definition to its logical end, well, almost everything produced today could qualify.
It's pretty much unavoidable, yeah. The technical truth, confirmed by our sources, is that most modern music, pop, contemporary rap, even a lot of what gets called new country in the US, technically it qualifies as electronic music.
Hold on, the new country angle. Expand on that. How is my track about a pickup truck in a dirt road electronic?
It's because of the production tools. The sources specifically point to things like those deep, booming trap 808 sounds. You hear them all the time in the bass lines and rhythm tracks of modern country now.
Okay. That really specific synthesized kick and sub-bass sound.
Right. You can't really get that exact texture without an electronic drum machine, or more likely a software simulation. So yeah, you might have acoustic guitars, live vocals on top, but the rhythmic foundation is often electronic.
So technically, I could label my mom's favorite new country star as electronic music, and I wouldn't be wrong.
Technically, no.
But I would be incredibly annoying.
That's precisely the conclusion in the source material. What's the practical point of calling a country track electronic? Other than, and this is a quote, irritating everyone who cares about genre lines.
Fair point. So this tension, this is why the purists bring up the intent clause, right? It's not just the tool you use, it's how, and maybe more importantly, why you use it.
Exactly. Their argument is that the term EM should really refer to music where the intent is clearly to create synthesized soundscapes or heavily programmed sounds that aren't just trying to mimic traditional acoustic instruments. The goal is something inherently electronic in feel and structure.
But isn't that just classic gatekeeping, saying, okay, you can use the synthesizer, but only our specific approved artistic use counts?
It definitely walks that line, yeah.
Yeah.
But it comes from a sort of philosophical stance on genre purity. Take ambient music, for example. Think Brian Eno, or maybe more recently Tycho. That's undeniably electronic music by intent.
Right, the purpose is atmosphere, texture, mood.
Yeah.
Use a synthesis.
Exactly. The intent isn't dancing, and it's not trying to sound like a string quartet. It's electronic at its core. Same goes for noise music, or early experimental electronic stuff like, say, throbbing gristle. Purely electronic means exploring sound itself. The intent is key to defining them as EM.
Okay, that distinction helps clarify things. EM is the massive pool, defined by the production method, but maybe nuanced by intent. Now let's bring in the crucial bit, the D factor. What makes electronic music become specifically electronic dance music, EDM?
Well, literally, it's defined by its primary purpose. It's music intended for dancing, usually continuous dancing, in clubs or similar environments. This is where we shift from pure sound exploration to functional music, music designed for movement, for communal rhythm.
And this gives us the really clear, widely accepted technical rule, the Venn diagram explanation.
Yes, exactly. The rule is beautifully simple, and we saw it phrased nicely in the sources, originally in Portuguese, but the idea is universal. All EDM is electronic music, but not all electronic music is EDM. If it's made with electronics and designed for dancing, it fits under the EDM umbrella, technically speaking.
Okay, let's spend a second on the flip side then. What genres use electronics but are definitely not considered dance music? That helps draw the line.
Sure. The main non-dance categories we've already touched on, ambient, downtempo, noise, and then there's that other interesting category we need to define a bit better, IDM, intelligent dance music.
Ah, yes, IDM. You called it a historically snobby term earlier. For someone new to this, what does intelligent actually mean here? Is it saying other dance music is dumb?
Well, that was certainly the implication sometimes. The term IDM really took hold in the 90s. It was used by artists and fans who were aiming for something more complex, more cerebral than standard house or techno. It implies complexity in rhythm, in structure, sound design. Think music that's often too experimental, maybe too intricate, or uses really complex polyrhythms.
Polyrhythms.
Meaning multiple different rhythms happening at the same time, often competing. It's hard to find a simple, continuous groove to lock into on a dance floor.
Okay, so while it might use dance instruments like synths and drum machines, it breaks the structural rule for continuous collective movement. It's more for home listening, maybe, or requires more focus.
Precisely. Artists like Aphex Twin, Square Pusher, technically electronic, obviously,
Yeah.
but a lot of their output demands focused listening.
Yeah.
It's not primarily functional dance music. The complexity makes the D factor less relevant or even irrelevant.
Makes sense. So the final piece of this literal definition puzzle, the musical structure that enables the D. What's the signature rhythmic thing for most music comfortably under the dance umbrella?
We're talking about the 4-on-the-floor signature beat. This is probably the single most defining feature of the core dance genres. House, techno, trance, lots of others. It just means the kick drum hits consistently on every strong beat. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Why is that so crucial? I mean, pop and rock are often in 44 time too, but they don't have that same relentless drive.
That's a really critical distinction. Pop and rock use 44, sure, but their kick drums often play syncopated patterns, maybe hitting on beats 1 and 3, or doing complex offbeat stuff. 4 on the floor means the kick drum is on every single strong beat. Boom, 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 boom. It provides this incredibly steady physical momentum. It kind of minimizes rhythmic complexity in favor of continuous physical energy.
Making it ideal for dancers to just lose themselves in it for hours.
Exactly. It's the absolute backbone of that communal dance experience.
Okay, so we've laid out the literal foundation. EM equals toolset. EDM, or toolset, applied specifically to dance music, often with that 4-on-the-floor structure. But if the literal definition is actually that clear, why all the intense cultural pushback? Why the negative vibe? Why does saying EDM often get you, like, eye rolls from people who really know the scene?
Right, and this is where we pivot completely. We leave the technical dictionary behind and step firmly into commercial history and geography. The resistance, the negativity, it's rooted almost entirely in how and where the term EDM was first really pushed and used systematically.
Ah, the story of the American marketing machine.
That's the one. The overwhelming consensus we found in the sources is that EDM wasn't some organic term bubbling up from the culture itself. It really took hold in the US, mostly after the 2000s, and it was seen as a very conscious, very calculated move by big labels, big promoters, corporations, the marking drone, as one source put it, an attempt to capture and sell a global phenomenon they didn't fully grasp.
So they looked across the pond, saw decades of history, techno from Detroit, house from Chicago, the massive UK rave scene, and saw a product, a fragmented but potentially huge product.
That seems to be the narrative, yes. If you're a major label exec or a big festival promoter in the US back then, selling trance, tech house, drum and bass individually to a mass audience, that's hard work. It's much easier through mainstream radio, big ad campaigns. If you have one simple, catchy acronym you can just slap on everything.
Make it digestible, marketable, and crucially scalable for these enormous festivals they wanted to build.
Exactly. So the accusation is they essentially invented, or at least heavily promoted, the brand name EDM to maximize profit, particularly from that huge festival boom happening in the States.
Categorizing diverse genres for mass consumption. And that, predictably, triggered immediate resistance, especially from the places with the longer history.
Which brings us straight to the European resistance, particularly the UK and the established underground scene there. They had decades of history, their own established language for this music.
Right. In the UK and Europe, dance music wasn't some new import. It had been a dominant youth culture for ages.
And because of that long history, people there tend to be much more specific. You listen to fast breakbeats, you say DnB, drum and bass. You like classic deep grooves, you say house or maybe techno. Just saying EDM as a catch-all, just not standard practice over there, it sounds off.
And for that community, the term EDM immediately carries those negative meanings we talked about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's instantly associated with commercialization, simplification, pop radio crossover, maybe a lack of depth or sophistication.
It's seen as reductive, a sign you don't really know the difference between, say, deep house and hardstyle.
Pretty much. It's viewed like the American equivalent of calling everything techno back in the 90s. It just signals that maybe you haven't quite done your homework on the culture and its nuances.
This cultural split, it seems most sharply defined when you compare the traditional rave to the modern EDM festival. That contrast feels key to understanding the purist anger.
Oh, it's the absolute core of the cultural schism. Historically, raves were defined by a certain philosophy. They were often underground, sometimes illegal, usually cheap or even free. The focus was entirely on the crowd, the sound system, the shared vibe. One source even brought up the concept of the temporary autonomous zone, or TAZ.
Okay, TAZ, we should probably unpack that a bit. What did that mean in the context of early rave culture?
So TAZ comes from anarchist philosophy, basically. It means creating a space, even just for a short time, that's free from the usual social rules, legal controls, even physical constraints, a kind of momentary rebellion against structure.
And for raves?
It meant showing up in some random warehouse, maybe a field, creating your own temporary community with its own rules, focusing purely on the music and that collective feeling, anonymity, freedom. The DJ often wasn't even visible. The crowd was the focus.
So if the traditional rave was about being a TAZ, escaping corporate structure, then the big corporatized EDM festival is basically its polar opposite.
Fundamentally, yes. The festivals that the term EDM got glued to, think EDC, Ultra, Tomorrowland, they violate pretty much every aspect of that TAZ idea. They're massive, hyper-corporatized events, strict security, fixed stages, VIP areas, brand logos everywhere, huge infrastructure. And the focus shifts completely away from the collective experience and squarely onto the spectacle being performed by the celebrity DJ on a giant stage.
The feeling being that the spirit of the music was kind of co-opted, packaged, and sold back.
That's the absolute core of the critique from the underground perspective. The moment the music and the culture got bundled under that EDM brand, it signaled for them that the experience was now primarily about generating maximum profit for corporations, not cultural exploration or community.
Okay, and this shift leads us directly from the corporate critique to the actual sound itself. The specific sonic stereotype that makes the term EDM so, well, toxic for the purists.
Exactly. Because when a purist hears EDM, their mind doesn't jump to the subtle groove of deep house or the dark pulse of proper techno. It evokes a very specific and often quite derided sound profile. Big room house, something homogenized, built around the heavy drop, basically festival bangers.
What defines that sound musically? What are the characteristics?
It's music engineered, really, for maximum, almost brute force impact in a huge space, like a stadium or massive festival field. Nuance often goes out the window. Harmonic complexity, subtle rhythmic shifts, they tend to get sacrificed. The structure became incredibly standardized. You have a long, repetitive buildup, often using things like white noise risers, maybe simple synth arpeggios, a vocal snippet.
Often counting down.
Yes. leading inevitably to this massive, heavily compressed, usually quite predictable bass drop. The whole point is that immediate, visceral rush.
And the sources highlighted one particular, almost cliche feature of that peak Americanized big room era, didn't they, around the 2010s?
They did. The sound became so formulaic, apparently, that the DJ often felt the need to explicitly prompt the crowd's reaction. The phrase cited again and again as the absolute epitome of the negative EDM stereotype is the DJ grabbing the mic and yelling, 3, 2, 1, JUMP.
Ah, the countdown.
That specific instruction, for many purists, just symbolizes the lack of organic energy, the manufactured hype, the over-the-top standardized nature of the spectacle.
So the music itself became perceived as generic, and the critique got pretty harsh. One source called EDM, and I'm quoting here, a repackaging of all the styles that were cheesy to begin with or went mainstream and ate themselves. That's quite a statement. They're saying EDM didn't invent musical cheesiness, it just compiled and amplified it.
It's a fascinating, quite deep critique, actually. It connects the perceived shame of EDM back to earlier moments when other dance genres arguably lost their way commercially. The argument is that those genres, once they got too big or too pop-focused, developed these commercially simplified, maybe less credible elements, and EDM just took those lowest common denominators and repackaged them under a new, shiny brand.
What specific styles were cited as being part of this original cheese that got repackaged? Let's name some names or sounds.
Okay, 3 main areas seem to stand out in the sources. First, what they called late-era progressive house. Apparently a genre that started quite nuanced, sometimes even minimalist, evolved into something critics dismissed as inaudible pop dirt. Overly slick, super polished tracks played at huge super clubs like Creamfields back in the day. Designed more for radio play and sponsorship deals than intricate DJ mixing.
Okay, what about commercialized trance? That gets mentioned a lot.
That's the second big one. Think about that era of endless, very similar sounding remixes of huge anthems like, Sandstorm or Binary Finery. The sound was often characterized by these soaring, super emotive female vocals, really predictable, sort of epic sounding chord progressions, almost saccharine sometimes. It felt stripped of the deeper, more subtle textures of earlier trance. It became pure stadium-sized emotion, targeted, as one rather judgmental source put it, at teenagers in fluorescent leggings.
Wow, that is a very specific and, quite judgmental image.
It definitely speaks to that perceived loss of integrity, the feeling that it became music for a less informed audience, unaware of the genre's deeper roots. And the third example given was brostep.
Ah, brostep, the post-Skrillex explosion of dubstep in the US.
Exactly. Hugely successful commercially, no doubt. But critics often dismissed it as focusing on jarring, mechanical, sometimes quite crude sound design, those wobbles and screeching noises, rather than the deep sub-bass frequencies and complex rhythmic patterns of original UK dubstep. It was seen as simplifying the form for maximum impact.
This intense policing of boundaries, it sounds like classic music snobbery, which, let's be honest, has a very long history in electronic music circles. Didn't the term EDM itself actually have a kind of snobby origin way back?
It did. It's like an endless cycle of elitism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some longtime heads remember that back in the 90s, EDM was sometimes used, ironically, by the other side, by the more serious electronic music fans, the IDM crowd, as a slightly dismissive, snobby, and hipster way to refer to anything they thought was too mainstream, too pop, too obviously danceable.
So anything that wasn't IDM or super deep underground techno got labeled EDM as an insult.
Kind of, yeah. It was a way to quarantine the pop club stuff, the more accessible sounds, away from what they considered the more cerebral or cutting-edge electronic music. A sign of disrespect, almost.
It really seems like the moment any electronic sound gets popular enough to get a broad label slapped on it for marketing, the underground immediately rejects that label and moves the goalposts further into obscurity.
That definitely seems to be the pattern of subgenre protection, yeah. And the critique wasn't just about the music, it extended to the performers, too. EDM culture got heavily criticized for its intense focus on the DJ performer as a spectacle, often overshadowing the music or the craft.
Right, the technical skill of mixing taking a back seat to the corporate showmanship.
Exactly. EDM became associated with these celebrity DJs who seemed to spend more time on stage antics throwing cakes into the crowd. That was a real thing.
Steve Aoki, yeah.
Gesturing wildly, waving flags, making these kind of generic motivational speeches. More time on that than actually demonstrating skilled mixing between tracks. One person in the sources lamented all the empty talk of us all being one and in the center of the universe, instead of hearing a really well-crafted, technically nuanced DJ set. It really symbolized that shift for many, from the DJ as this sort of respected, maybe slightly anonymous sound engineer and cultural guide, to the DJ as a mainstream celebrity brand and corporate entertainer.
Okay. We've definitely established the literal definition and the really powerful negative connotation it carries for many. But the argument isn't over. Today, there's actually a strong counterargument that the term EDM should just be, well, reclaimed as a useful, broad umbrella term. What's the case for using EDM broadly?
The main argument really boils down to practicality and utility. If you just take the literal definition, electronic dance music, then logically it should cover house, techno, trance, dubstep, hardstyle, D&D, everything else primarily designed for dancing. Proponents argue that trying to restrict the term only to that specific big room house sound from the 2010s is just arbitrary. It's unnecessary gatekeeping.
And it's useful for casual conversation, right? If you're talking to someone new to the scene, or maybe, your mom asks what kind of music you like.
Exactly. You need a term that works like jazz or rock. Both of those cover hundreds of wildly different subgenres. Think bebop versus fusion jazz, or punk rock versus classic rock. But the broad term gives people an easy entry point.
So if you listen to a playlist that jumps from, say, deep house to future bass to drum and bass, it's just simpler to say you listen to EDM than trying to list 10 different subgenres they've never heard of.
Especially for people who engage with the music more casually. It provides a necessary label without demanding they have an encyclopedic knowledge of every microgenre. It serves the casual listener.
But the pushback against that broad utilitarian definition is still incredibly strong. Precisely because, as we've discussed, the connotation has almost completely swallowed the literal denotation for so many people. This is the argument for the exclusive genre, that context, culture, history, they matter more than the dictionary.
And this is where the analogies really drive home the cultural divide. Many listeners argue, quite passionately, that if you say EDM today, you implicitly trigger all those visual and sonic associations we talked about. Spin-in records, huge American festivals, maybe artists like David Guetta or Marshmello. For them, the cultural baggage overrides the literal definition. It's unavoidable.
That genre comparison from the source material was really potent here. Someone argued it's simply wrong to put, say, Aphex Twin and David Guetta in the same category just because they both happen to use electronics.
That comparison perfectly highlights the absurdity from the purist perspective. It's like saying, I don't know, Sepultura, Lynyrd Skynyrd, and Taylor Swift are basically the same thing because they all use guitars.
Right. The shared instrument or production method feels superficial compared to the massive differences in genre, cultural context, philosophy, audience, everything else.
To just lump them together under one broad acronym suggests, to the purist, a fundamental misunderstanding or even ignorance of those crucial differences.
It feels like maybe the technology itself, the modern music landscape, might be forcing the issue now, whether the purists like it or not. Let's talk about that modern algorithmic influence.
Yeah, this is really interesting sort of forward-looking point that came up because algorithms, well, they don't have cultural baggage, do they? They just have data. And some argue that streaming platforms, recommendation engines, metadata tags, they might actually be redefining the term EDM simply through sheer repetition in how they categorize things.
How does an algorithm redefine a genre? Does Spotify care if the DJ threw Cake last weekend?
Not one bit. The algorithm cares about things like BPM beats per minute, maybe key signature, what instruments are used, and critically, listener behavior. What do people who like this track also listen to? So if you search for EDM on Spotify or Apple Music today, what do the algorithms often give you?
Probably a really broad mix.
Exactly. They often fill those EDM playlists with a genuinely wide spectrum of contemporary dance music. Future bass sits next to tech house, maybe some melodic trap, various flavors of house, even drum and bass sometimes. It's categorizing primarily by function, is it danceable, and tool, is it electronic?
So the tech is essentially pushing EDM back towards its original literal meaning, a broad, non-specific term for electronic dance music, covering all the styles meant for dancing, just because that's the most efficient way to tag and deliver the content.
It's kind of like the triumph of data efficiency over messy cultural history. The algorithm doesn't care about the historical beef with Creamfields or the perceived shame of the 2012 festival sound. It just cares about delivering a continuous stream of danceable electronic tracks to users who search for EDM, which suggests that maybe that very specific negative 2010s big room connotation is actually starting to become, well, antiquated. The platforms are using the term more broadly because it works for them.
That is a really compelling point. The meaning might just be evolving naturally, driven by data, by how millions of people are actually listening and discovering music now, kind of overriding decades of cultural resistance and gatekeeping from within the scene.
And that, I think, brings us pretty much full circle. Because for you, the listener, trying to figure all this out, the practical meaning of EDM today really does depend entirely on who you're talking to. Their geographical background, their cultural knowledge, or perhaps lack thereof, completely dictates how they'll likely interpret that term.
Okay, so let's try and bring this home. Let's synthesize it all. How should a listener who wants to be informed but also avoid stepping on any cultural landmines tactically use these terms?
Right. I'd say use electronic music as your go-to for the absolute broadest category. It safely covers anything made primarily with electronic tools, including all that ambient, experimental IDM stuff that isn't really for dancing. That's your safe harbor for technical accuracy.
Okay, safe harbor established. Now, how do we handle the loaded weapon that is EDM?
When you use EDM, you just have to be aware of that dual meaning. You can use it in the simple, literal sense as a catch-all for electronic dance music, meaning it includes techno, house, trance, D&B, dubstep, etc. That definition generally works fine with more casual fans, maybe younger listeners, and definitely with streaming platform language. However, if you're talking to a real scene veteran, a dedicated rave enthusiast, maybe a working DJ, or someone deeply steeped in that UK or European underground history,
Then you need to know.
you absolutely need to recognize that you might be inadvertently referencing, or at least risking the connotation of that very specific commercial, high-energy, drop-focused big room sound. The sound associated with that big American festival boom in the 2010s, the sound they likely disdain.
Okay, so the cocktail party advice for the savvy listener might be, the safest bet is always to be specific. If you can say house, techno, drum and bass, shows you know your stuff. But if you do use EDM, just be aware you're either referring to the whole dance music category or, more riskily, you might be signaling that specific, often negatively viewed commercial sound of the 2010s US circuit.
That is the perfect tactical summary, I think. Your choice of words instantly signals your level of engagement, your awareness of the history, and where you kind of sit in this ongoing cultural conversation. Using the specific subgenre, sign of respect for the nuances. Using the broad term EDM, sign of practical efficiency, maybe less deep in engagement. Both are valid, but they communicate different things.
It's really clear this whole fight over words is deeply felt, highly passionate. And our source material made one final, really fascinating comparison. It suggested that maybe only metal fans are more specific, pretentious, and fervent about microgenres than electronic music fans.
I saw that too. And I think that comparison is brilliant, actually, because it highlights that this is rarely just about the music itself, is it? The discussion around EDM or specific metal subgenres, it's almost always tied up with culture, history, authenticity, identity, whether you were there when it was still considered real.
Which raises our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to think about after this. Why do fans in these really established, incredibly subgenre-rich communities like electronic music, like metal, feel such a powerful, almost protective need to define and defend their specific sounds, especially against broad labels or commercialization?
Yeah, what does that fierce protection of microgenres tell us about identity? About finding community in music today? Is all this boundary setting just about protecting the art form itself from getting watered down? Or is it maybe, fundamentally, about defining who belongs to the exclusive cultural club and who stays on the outside?
Something to chew on. We'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.